Good evening, everyone. Hello again. My name is Patrick Payne, and welcome to the Doomsday to America Project channel. And glad you're joining me tonight. I've got a special video that I'm going to make tonight, and it's probably going to be lengthy. Grab yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, comfortable chair, because we're going to go through some deep history here, complete with source material, pointing out a number of relationships. We're going to concentrate on the Payne family tonight in the Doomsday to America project. And since that's the family that I've been researching, that led me to discoveries of these family networks that I'm interested in and trying to share here tonight. But tonight, this being a new channel, I want to share the Payne family information that I have. I think it'll be at least of interest to the numerous Payne family researchers out there. So I'm going to put on my historian cap, or what I like to refer to as my Payne Herald cap, and go over the information that I've uncovered through primary sources or published, respected sources, archaeological journals, things like that that either cite their sources or include it within their material. So I'll be sharing that with you tonight, along with my own research. Also, dealing with primary records here for the most part that I'll be sharing, that fills in a lot of the blanks that the others don't. And then there's a lot of other secondary sources on the periphery that I also will be sharing, because when it all points in the same direction, you're doing something right, so it needs to be talked about. So why this is important is because what I've discovered is that there's a number of Payne families in the UK throughout its history, from the time of the conquest, that descend from one family from Normandy by the name, they were known by the name of Paynelder. It's kind of an unusual situation, though, because this family also is known to have held lands in the Channel Islands, particularly in Jersey, where they have been known since at least the 13th century by the name Payne, just P-A-Y-N. They've dropped the E-L from their surname, and I'll discuss that in another video, and kind of do to some degree in my first one, I believe. But tonight, I want to connect all those dots. I want to show you the connections I've made from the conquest through that Norman period, that that connect the various branches of their family that spread out among England or throughout England, and why they spread out in the way they did. But yet, nevertheless, they were one family. They were related, and I'm going to show you the evidence of that tonight. So, like I say, make yourself comfortable, because it's going to take a while. I want to start tonight. You're looking at a map, of course, of the United Kingdom and Europe, portion of Europe, that I'm going to be addressing tonight. And I want to start a little bit and talk about this Google map that I've got here. Let me make sure I've got this centered, because it doesn't look like it is. I've got something going on here where I've got more screen available than but nevertheless, good enough. All right, so I'm going to expose the fact that I have OCD here. I'm a little embarrassed to the degree you're about to see. But I'm going to start with showing you the Google map that I created as I began tracing the family. I'll start with these London Paynes. I've got a little filter over here, and I'm on the wrong screen. Hold on a second. We'll get it right here. Okay, so I'm going to start over here with the London Paynes. I'm going to go ahead and turn that layer on, and you can see it populates within the map here. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera so you don't have to look at my mug and it getting in the way. So what you see here, and I know it doesn't look like much here, but I began plotting the Paynes in London a long time ago. And what I had done is I'd gone on to all the major online sources that were available, and and I'm talking books, genealogy, websites, Roots Web. I mean, anywhere out where I could find data posted on the Payne family that reference them in London specifically. And I plotted it. And although it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of Paynes here, trust me, there's probably, well, if I started scrolling through this list over here, the number of Paynes, which I guess I'll go ahead and do, I think you'll quickly agree that there's probably thousands of entries in here. And this is just for the Paynes of London. So, and granted, this is mostly like births, so it'll give the name of a child and maybe the name of the parents, maybe an occupation and a date, and where in London it occurred. So that'll get plotted. Or it might be a death in the same kind of way, or it'll be a marriage where it'll name a groom and a spouse and a date they were married and the church that they were married in. All that information I collected over the years and plotted it on this map. And I did that after discovering that my ninth great grandparents, my gateway ancestors, had arrived in Maryland in October of 1664 on a ship from London by the name of Golden Fortune. So that started my OCD-ness about plotting all this. And then that grew over the years. So now we'll get into a little more detail. I went on because I've connected them to this East Anglian Payne family in particular. So I did pretty much the same thing for the Paynes in East Anglia. And then further throughout Domesday Book and forward to Norman times. So I'm going to go ahead and put on all these layers for you. I really only need this Domesday Tenant and Lords for our talk tonight. And you can see now, and that's just the Domesday Tenants and Lords through the Norman days of England. And then I also did it in Norfolk and Suffolk. And when I populate that, this gets to be a pretty heavy map. But it contains a lot of very useful data. And I'm going to make use of that here tonight. So we're going to start with that. And you can also see that this covers the entire United Kingdom and also into Normandy and in what was the Holy Roman Empire. I've used all of this to help me to come to the conclusion that we're talking about one Norman family here, and one that likely became part of it through, or actually my theory is that it was actually a family living in the Holy Roman Empire that found themselves living in Normandy among the Normans, and for various reasons I'll go into later, received the appellation or the surname Payne, Pagani or Paganus or Paganali in the Latin records, but locally they were known as Payne or Paynell. So getting back to the subject, and I have trouble with that, so I got to clock myself. And while I'm on that subject, if I do lose track and this goes over a certain period of time, I'm going to give it 30 minutes or so. So if within the next 30 minutes, I don't think I'm going to be able to complete this quickly after that, I'll decide what to do at that point, whether to make this a second video or to continue. So, all right, so let's get on tonight. What the topic, where we're going to start tonight is in London. So, finds that I had made in this book, and I'm citing this as my source because they do have primary source information in here. It's an archaeological study of a dig in the London waterfront at the docks and the revelations there. I had already known that the Payne family had owned a quay in London near the customs house. I found that in records from the 16th and 17th century Paynes that I had been researching in Fulham and Hammersmith. They were also had a manor in Petworth and down in the Sussex area. And I became very interested in that family because we'll talk about those later. So I'm going to get right to the topic here. But within this book, And I'm going to go back to my map here and zoom back into London. And actually, this might be easier. Let's see if I've got it in here. Payne's key. There we go. That makes it a little easier, I thought, but it's not going to zoom in for me. Still got to do that manually. All right, so we're going to zoom in here to this area of London that this book examined. Like I say, it's at the foot of the Customs House is built right there on the Thames, near the tower. Over here is where we're talking about, this area over here. In fact, this marker here, I think, is one that I put down for it. So this is Payne's key. And this is one of the records that I found. It's from 1467. We'll talk about that in a moment. And the key here was known by the name of Child's Key, Sab's Key, Sab's Dock. It was a tenement located at what is now the Customs House. It's, well, at the foot of the Customs House, I should say. And that's of great interest to the Payne family for the sole reason that Geoffrey Chaucer worked at the Customs House for a number of years, and he was a friend and business associate of the Chief Butler of England, whose name was John Payne, who died in 1402. He was in exile. He went into exile with Henry of Bolingbroke, went on crusade with him, and came back to Ravenspur with him in 1399. And when he took the crown, and was appointed Chief Butler of England and Constable of Norwich Castle. But he was a friend of Geoffrey Chaucer from apparently an early age, and they were both retainers of John of Gaunt. Both were favorites of the Duke of Lancaster, and as it turns out, his son Henry of Bolingbroke as well. So they had very lengthy relationships in the Lancastrian affinity. John Payne was at the top among Sir Thomas Erpingham, Sir John Fastolf, and other members of that circle of the close affinity to the crown, who seemed to have had the ear of the Duke of Lancaster and the King of England and Henry IV. So, but anyway, back to this subject. This is the area that they had excavated, and again, this book is the London waterfront from 1100 to 1666 excavation in Thames Street, London, 1974 through 84. So a 10-year archaeological study. And we're going to begin, again, this is a map that they show that gives the area of their study, particularly these areas here marked A, B, C, and D. And in particular, we're going to be talking about this area over here in D that was in the possession of the Payne family from the 13th century. And you heard that correct, folks, from the 13th century. There's documentation of the Payne family owning this particular key here in London. You see some images here, and this is really where I'm going to start picking up the story with the Payne family is here in regard to Tenement 10, later the King's Arms, as noted here. And while you can enjoy looking at this, I'm going to have some help here and read from a printed copy that I have, and I'm going to skip through it just to the points. I don't have all day here. I know your time is valuable too, so I'm going to try to just hit the main points here, and it begins with Tenement 10, later the King's Arms. Tenement 10 lay between Tenement 9 to the west and Reader's Gate to the east, extending from Thames Street to the Thames. It was known as the King's Arms in 1649 and was also referred to as the Back Key in the 1650s. The tenement may possibly have been included in the early 12th century leases of two wharves at Reader's Gate, along with Tenement 11. The earliest certain reference to this property occurs in the will of a Lawrence Payne, which was proved on 24th of January, 1278, bequeathing to his wife Dionysia his house, solar, kitchen, or coquina, and cellar for life, reverting thereafter to his nearest heir. To his eldest son John, his house lying between the house which Richer held of Lawrence and his own tenement on the other side. To his son Robert was his cellar towards the quay versus Caem. To the quay itself, to his son and the key itself to his son Gilbert and daughter Agidia. And then there's a reference here to the primary record CLA/023/CP/01/009/10. And I won't repeat those every time. I'll just mention the reference briefly and move on. All this property, with the exception of Dionysia's part, appear to have come to Gilbert, whose will was proved on 6 November 1290 and bequeathed to his mother Dionysia all his tenements apud, records, Reader's Gate, to be held by her and her heirs forever. A week later, a John Le Trier, I guess you can pronounce this in a number of ways, but I'm going to propose a completely different name here. And I know this is conjecture. I'm going to admit it. But because of the records that you'll see later that associate the Paine family with another family by the name of Lamprier, I'm going to suggest that this is a misspelling for the surname Lamprier. And that's just a suggestion, but that's a theory that I've got going on right now. It's irrelevant for our purposes, but of interest to the Paine family, I'll explain later. A week later, John La Trier, or however you want to say it, son and heir of a James of that name, and heir of Gilbert Paine deceased, quit claim to Walter Le Marbleur and Dionysia, now Walter's wife, that was the widow of Lawrence, all that tenement once of Lawrence Paine, with houses built upon it, and the key and free entrance and exit between the gate, the porta, called Reader's Gate, towards the east, and the tenement of Robert Lambin in Tenement 9, towards the west, and extending from Thames Street to the Thames. Gilbert having bequeathed to his mother Dionysia, heirs and assigns all tenements of Lawrence. I'm going to skip down here a little bit, where it says that the messuage, the land itself, was to be held by Adam and Matilda, and heirs and assigns of Matilda during Walter's life, saving to Roger de Roxelli and his wife Marjorie, and the heirs and assigns of Marjorie, free entrance and exit to the key through the said gate. Roger and Marjorie, one of Dionysia's, this is important here, one of Dionysia's daughters from Lawrence Paine, presumably, who had inherited the north part of the tenement, now quit claimed to Adam and Matilda and to Adam's heirs all right and claim, saving to themselves and heirs access to and from the key through the gate which was in the entrance beneath the new solar of the said messuage, and was 7 feet 10.5 inches wide. Okay, so we can find further information about the family's ownership. And I'm particularly interested in this new discovery with the Roxelli family because there was knights of that name that are probably of interest that I need to look into. But so it continues with more information, and I'm just going to skip through this so we can move along here. I've already established the Paine family ownership, so I want to jump to the latest point in the records of this particular family of Paines that we're talking about here. As let me go to let's go here and show you the family we're talking about. This is the Lawrence Paine that's being discussed here. He was born before 1238, presumably in London, where he appears. He died before 24 January 1278, when he last appears in records. His wife's name was Dionysia. She was a daughter of Elizus Bachelor, presumably of Middlesex. Dionysia died after 1290, when she last appears in records. And again, as we just heard, she married secondly a man by the name of Walter Marbler, or Marbler. They had several children, as is revealed in this documentation and the records that I found, including a son by the name of John, Robert, a daughter, Agidia, a Gilbert, Lawrence Jr., and a daughter by the name of Marjorie, who married the Roger Rochelle that that was mentioned in the text. So from here, the last mention with this family appears to come in on page 173 of this particular book, where it reads that at some subsequent date after 1401, John Sabile infoved the property to a Robert K. Wood, clerk, Thomas Bassett, gentleman, and to Robert Rose and William Child, fishmongers. In his will, Child bequeathed it to his wife Joan, and on 20 May 1443, K. Wood, Bassett, and Rose duly demised the whole tenement with adjacent wharf cellars and solars, and 2 shops in front with solars above to Joan, who had since married John Payne, grocer, for her life. And that's in the calendar of clothes rolls. By 1454, the property was in the possession of Thomas, son of William Child, fishmonger, even though his mother Joan was still living. He claimed to have inherited it from his father, and granted it on 2 July to Richard Lee, alderman, John Whitticksmead, Thomas Wells, or Well, and John Parker, scrivener. It was now described as being anciently called Burgate's Key, afterwards Blas Key, presumably after Thomas Blas, tenant in 1401, and lately Child's Key, and as including the adjacent wharf, cellars, and solars, together with the 2 shops situated in front of the solars built above them. 2 years later, on 2 November 1456, Child quitclaimed all interest in the tenement to his mother and her husband, John Payne. John and Joan granted it on 31 August 1465 to Thomas Fermery, scrivener, and Thomas Page, pewterer. Again, the primary source record for that is given as /195/24 PRO record. So, with all that established, I'm not going to continue. Well, I'm going to move right along to the connection that really opened up the doors to Payne research. And I'm happy to share that with you tonight. I'm actually very excited to share it because it blows so many myths out of the water that it's quite incredible. But before I do get into that, let's look at this a little bit more because it gives a little information here. In Tenement 10, at the waterfront and building site period, what we're talking about here is Building 7 in period C4.2, where the documentary references state that in 1275, Lawrence Payne would have included 2 cellars and a key, and was then, if not before, divided. That's in 1278, folks. I mean, we're talking early times here. I'm really astounded that I've been able to do this. But in 1290, Walter Lamar Ruler property included a gate on the east side of Rother's Gate, divided into 2 parts, north and south, between 1308 and 1326. The north part has a new solar. The south part to Adam Pikeman, fishmonger. In 1332, Pikeman obtained the north part. And in 1349, Henry de Bosworth, vintner, apparently possessed it. Then it gives some other information here. And then it continues on this page. It also talks about, here we go, Tenement 10, where it says that in 1278, Lawrence Payne would have included, I guess that's, okay, it's the same information. So nothing new there. And then we have some pictures of this area in Tenement 10. So you actually can see some of what was actually excavated. And it gives a description of the entire property here in great detail. So, as you can imagine, I've been highly interested in reading through this. So, with that said, I think we can now we can move on to the next person of interest here. And I'm going to bring up my genealogy software, and I'm going to type in the name of Walker. because what I am looking for is Elizabeth Walker, or excuse me, Ann Walker. All right? No, I am right. I want Elizabeth Walker, the wife of Thomas Paine of Petworth. And you'll note his coat of arms here. So, why is he of interest? Well, let me get my notes together and we'll talk about him some. And at the same time, I'm also going to bring up my map. Let me resize this here. Go back to the map, and because we want to look at these Paines of Fulham. Yes, we want the Paines of Fulham. I'll take that one. Okay, we're moving now on to this family that I found from the 16th and 17th century records and began researching, particularly because of the coat of arms that you just saw. I'm going to go back to that as soon as I get this map set. All right. I think that's good enough. Actually, we'll go back in. Try to get as much of that area as we can, because over here's the key that we're talking about. But these Paines of Fulham, they were known as the Paines of Fulham and Hammersmith and of Petworth. Now they own property, as said, Fulham, Hammersmith, but they also have property in Notting Hill, all throughout. We'll get into that later in probably another video, because I don't think it's necessary for tonight. But you can see the markers. They had, including owning a tenement in Bishopsgate near this key. We're about to establish that they actually, at this time, owned that same key, Paine's key, that Lawrence Paine had held in the 13th century. Now, I'm referencing here documents that are held at the London Metropolitan Archives, and specifically it's deed FLT 1/372 Walker. This is the first part. Walker is of the first part. It's a deed. So it's talking about Mr. Walker of the first part and Thomas Paine of the second part. Copy of an indenture being a settlement made subsequent to the marriage of the said Thomas Paine to Elizabeth his wife of a messuage and premises in Appleton. And that is a very significant place, because if you look it up, Appleton is in Norfolk. It's not in London. We're talking about property in Norfolk now. As referenced here, it says 19 Elizabeth, and then you see, or in this record, it cites the Norfolk Record Office, Flitcham, date 1577. So this family of London, and as I mentioned, you saw the arms here. If you are into Paine research and you've gotten back this far and interest that far, you would recognize these to be nearly identical to the arms that are described in the visitations for Sir Thomas Paine of Market, Bosworth, Leicestershire. So now we have those same arms, a little different. I think the difference here being these arms is fess engrailed, and it's got these. That's the most significant thing, really, is that it's an engrailed fess rather than just a simple fess or a fess that's ermine or something like that we'll see later, associated with Sir Thomas Paine. But otherwise, I think heralds would agree that it's the same coat of arms, indicating descent from Sir Thomas Paine of Market, Bosworth. So now we're discussing a deed that it turns out that Anthony Walker, the father of Elizabeth Walker, Thomas Paine's wife, had made to the couple in 1577. The contents of the record states that it's gifts of mourning rings to Aunt Mills, brother Pellet, sisters Elizabeth Pellet, and Mary, the wife of Thomas Palmer, Esquire, eldest daughter Hannah, for part of her portion, £600, £300 being a legacy from her grandfather, William Alcock, gentleman. Pain researchers will also recognize that name Alcock, for that's going to lead us to East Anglia, as you'll see in a moment. To youngest daughter Mary, £400, 100 being from her grandfather. To son William Pellet, household stuff and plate after the death of Thomas Paine's wife, who had the use, or Thomas Pellet's wife. It could be, let me back up here. Have we even talked? We got a Thomas Palmer, but no mention of his wife. So we've got any other Thomases? No. So who are we talking about here? We're talking about Thomas Paine's wife, Elizabeth, who had the use for life. The wife Hannah, residuary legatee and executrix. Brother William Pellet, gent, and Henry Shelley, Esquire, and kinsman Ralph Mills, Esquire, overseers. All copyhold messuages held of the manor of Itfield to daughter Hannah, all freehold and copyhold messuages in West Firely to youngest daughter Mary. Firely, I guess. Manor of Sutton Hall to daughters Hannah and Mary, with all lands in Sutton occupied by Thomas Leggett. The moiety of messuages, wharfs, docks, and premises in Thames Street, land called Sabb's Key and Sabb's Dock, purchased with his brother of Thomas Paine to daughters Hannah and Mary. Should son William Pellet die without heirs male of his body, Thomas Paine's messuage farm, lands and premises called Bigner Park, devised to nephew William Pellet, son of his brother and tailmail. Codicil appoints William Pellet of Lewes, merchant, and overseer in place of Ralph Mills, dated 8 June 1680. Moving on. Another record associated with the family we find new versions of these companies, often called Second Pauls and Second Blackfriars, emerged in 1599 and 1600, and during the first decade of the 17th century they were significant players in the London theatrical scene. Second Pauls opened around 1599, organized by Master of the Choristers, Edward Pierce. That just happened to be the name of the captain of the Golden Fortune of London that brought my ninth great-grandfather to Maryland in 1664. So, as you'll see, here they are associated with the Paines again in London, who generally work in conjunction with a single playwright, stage manager, but seems never to have relinquished control of his chorister's dramatic activities. And I'm going to move on because, really the purpose here is just to point out this new connection with Paines and Norfolk. And I've got another record here. It's speaking of a Robert Paine, who also appears in place of William Rastell. And this is obviously talking about the Blackfriars in London and the stage players that evolved into William Shakespeare's players at the Globe and all that. And we're talking about the same group here, as you'll see. But Robert Paine also appears in place of William Rastell. C. Smith at 488, and I'll get into more detailed sources later, but right now I'm just trying to move along here. But it's talking about a merchant named William Rastell, who's a haberdasher. Whoa, I need to back up here. John Marston and Francis Beaumont, students at the Inns of Court, playwrights at both Blackfriars and Paul's, were well connected, but hardly, to use Harbage's term, lordly. Many at both Blackfriars and Paul's were well connected, but hardly, well, I'm repeating myself. Many of the partners in the Blackfriars syndicate seem to have been citizens who, as members of a guild, could take advantage of their ability to take apprentices for the theater. A merchant named William Rastell, a haberdasher named Thomas Kendall, and a goldsmith named Robert Keesar. Others, such as James Robindon, maybe Robinson, maybe a mistype, and Robert Paine, are obscure figures, but it is reasonable to suspect that they, too, may have been from among the middling sort. Moving on to other records here about the Blackfriars. All right. Getting back to Thomas Paine here. What's interesting here, I'm moving away from the connection with Shakespeare. I just wanted to point that out because I believe there's a connection here too. I won't get into it now. But you can see that this Thomas Paine of Petworth and of Hammersmith Fulham, in the records regarding him, he was educated at Lincoln's Inn. There's a Court of Chancery record here with Thomas Roe versus Thomas Paine of London. And he had property, Sabbs Key and Sabbs Dock. So the same property that Lawrence Paine had held is now in possession of Thomas Paine of Petworth in London. He's also a man who's received property, as we had seen, in Flitcham and Appleton, which is in Norfolk. That's of great importance, also considering their coat of arms that they're bearing. But there's records here that I'm going to discuss now that clearly associate him with this property, this key in London. So in this record here, we have more mention of the Pellet family of East Grinstead, and I'll have to get into them another time. But it's associated with that, pretty much the same record. But it continues that the manor of Sutton Hall to daughters Hannah and Mary, with all lands in Sutton occupied by Thomas Leggett. And then it talks about the moiety of Messawages, the wharfs and docks and premises in Thames Street, land called Sabbs Key, Sabbs Dock, that goes to Thomas Paine. It's referring to this Thomas Paine here. And again, he's got arms bearing the arms of Sir Thomas Paine, who I'll now transition to here. We've talked about the coat of arms a little bit. I could go into much more detail on this family, but out of time, I'm going to have to move on here. Let's see how we're doing while I'm taking a little pause here. Maybe you can get another cup of coffee. We're 37 minutes into it. I think I can get this wrapped up and make my point here as long as I keep moving along. So we're going to move on to Sir Thomas Paine now, the Sir Thomas Paine that we're talking about here, and I'm going to type in my genealogy software over here the surname Pulteney, because his wife happened to be a Margaret Pulteney, as specified in the visitations. Make sure I get the right one here, because there was a couple. As you can see, there's one that was married to a Bracebridge. All right, let me resize it. All right, now here we go. So now we're talking about Sir Thomas Paine. I've got him labeled here as a priest, and that's going to surprise a lot of people. And I don't want you to take it as being a proven fact yet, but I have tentatively tagged him as being a priest, and that may account for his the honor of being called a sir. At that time, I have found examples where there's a Thomas Paine priest in the area of East Anglia associated with this family, and he turns out to have been a priest, and he is referred to as sir. So with that in mind, I'm speculating that it may be our Sir Thomas Paine of Market Bosworth, but again, it's speculation. I just have that in there as kind of to help me easily find things. So what do we know about this Sir Thomas Paine? It turns out we don't really know a whole lot. We know that the visitations of Leicestershire, Norfolk, Suffolk, London cite that he is a man from Market Bosworth, Leicestershire. So let's go look at our map here. What does it have to say beside my big X, which again is to help me quickly find these places on the map? Because as you can see, this is Market Bosworth, where we have Sir Thomas Paine from the visitation, and you can see the activity of the Paines in this area. And in another video, I'll go into detail and explain these divisions between the color codes I've got going on here. But essentially what we have is the green relate to the Paine family in England, where it's spelled P-A-Y-N, P-A-Y-N-E, P-A-I-N-E, P-E-Y-N, P-A-I-G-N. It is spelled so many different ways in records. Often in the same record, you'll find it spelled several different ways. Surnames were not standardized. Handwriting was not standardized. Everything was phonetic. Nobody spelled anything right. So it's ridiculous to make assumptions that it means anything at this period of time. But having said that, you can see there's a great overlap between those pains with that spelling, P-A-Y-N, with the red markers, which indicate members of the Paynell family, spelled P-A-Y-N-E-L. They are known to descend from the Paynells of Normandy, who came over at the time of the conquest, and were given great estates from Yorkshire all the way down into Devonshire. I think it was nearly 120 manors and estates that they were given by the conqueror. And I've plotted a lot of those on here, as you can see. Like I was saying, all these records I've plotted as much as I can. So here you can start to see what we're dealing with here and the overlap that these families had. But getting back to Sir Thomas Paine, we know from the visitations and other records that have since been found that he is known to have had 3 sons that are mentioned in the visitations. Other records say that he had as many as 7 sons. I think there's a reputable source that claims that he had 5 daughters and 7 sons, I believe, or maybe the other way around. But nevertheless, we only know for certain of 3, and those are the ones that have been researched the most here. And I think I can confidently say that I've proven that the eldest son, Robert, is the ancestor of the Paines of Huntingdonshire, specifically of St. Neots, represented by Sir Robert Paine, who died in 1630. I want to say 35, but it may have been 32. I'm not going to bother to bring up his record right now. But it is known that Sir Robert of St. Neots, through the Victoria County histories and other reliable sources, that he had 3 his father's name was Robert, and 2 or 3 of his grandfather's names were Robert, and they trace back to this Thomas Paine. And as I'll explain later how I made that connection and kind of prove that relationship that this is the case. So getting back, we know that Robert established the family down here in Leicestershire. Then we have a son by the name of William Paine. That's often been confused, and I believe I've got it right here. But this one is a William Paine, who also claimed those farms of his father. He died after 1481, and his descendants. Let's see if I can get this here. And John Paine the Elder. This branch came along with my branch down into, in this case, they settled at East Greensted. And we'll get into that later. So they were down there in Sussex, along with the Paines of Fulham, Hammersmith, and Petworth. And we'll see that here as we move along. So they were, William Paine was the ancestor of that family line. And the last son here of Sir Thomas Paine is Edmund. And this is a well-documented family. There's been published genealogies on this family that date back to the year 1881 by the Paines of New England, to which that family migrated in the 17th century during the Great Migration period. It's beginning in 1635. It stems from the descendants of this Edmund Paine through his son William, as we'll see here, the wife of Marjorie Ashe. I'm convinced what brought this family to East Anglia from, Leicestershire, Lincoln, and even Ireland, as some sources claim. Bloomfield, the antiquarian of East Anglia, claims this family descends from an Adam Paine of Ireland, and don't have time to get into all of that. But we're going to move on. But from this William Paine, who had become, you can basically trace this whole family line, this particular one, by following the Earls of Ormond, the Earls of Wiltshire, the Earls of Salisbury, and the Duke of Buckingham, to whom William Payne served as bailiff at Hengrave Manor in Suffolk. And the family moved to the area of Bury St. Edmunds and lived in that area, where they purchased the manor of Naughton and were lords there, while, as I said, William became the bailiff at Hengrave under the 3rd Duke of Buckingham, and his son, who I want to mention now, Henry Payne, Esquire of Naughton, Lord of Naughton, was also bailiff at Hengrave under Sir Thomas Kitson after the 3rd Duke of Buckingham had been executed. Sir Thomas Kitson had appointed his good friend Henry Payne to that position. Now, this gets back to my first video that I posted about the Chief Butler of England, John Payne of Windham, Norfolk, who died in 1402. He had been the Constable of Norwich Castle and an MP for Norwich, married to Sibylla de Hetherseth of a prominent Norfolk family, and lived at Windham. But historians have now proven that John Payne was the son of Nicholas Payne of Hellhoughton in Norfolk, and I hope I said that right. I have trouble with some of these names. Windham I at least get right, but Hellhoughton or Hellhoughton is where John Payne's family was from. It's a little south of the area of Norwich, and it's to this family that we find is connected with the Paynes of Fulham. And we know that through the property mentioned in the records of Thomas Payne of Fulham and Hammersmith about property at Flitcham and Appleton in Norfolk that's associated with this family, this Payne family in East Anglia. So we know it's one family, right down to the coat of arms that they bear. So, and you can see the difference here. Well, the Fulham family have like a rose in the fess to differentiate them from this family, but otherwise the arms are identical in every way, with the exception of maybe the border and the mascles that we find in the full achievement of Thomas Payne. I don't know if I have that in here. Let's see if I can pull it up. I've got it elsewhere, but there's more of these arms. The full achievement includes as many mascles, or excuse me, bezants that fill in this red border. So there's more gold that outlines this, like little studs of gold that permeate, that surround this border. But otherwise, it's the same arms, and we can be sure that it's the same family. But because of that, now we also know that, not only are we dealing with, the lines of Paynes in Huntingdonshire, the lines of Paynes down in London, the lines of Paynes that are in Sussex and in Surrey and in Hampshire, because they're now connected to the Paynes of Southampton, and the family of Lawrence Payne is shown, but also of the family of, I didn't include this as I was talking about Lawrence Payne and his family, but we can still go back to them briefly now and talk about them now. That from Lawrence's family arose the John Payne who became mayor of Southampton. His son had married, a daughter married mayor of Southampton. That's Marjorie. Yes, she married Andrew James, who also was a mayor of Southampton, who is the son of Peter James, who's also a mayor of Southampton. John Payne's son, John Payne, was the father of Thomas Payne, who is a mayor of Southampton and is mentioned in the ownership of Sabbs Quay and Docks in those later records that we mentioned, after 1472. Those records were still referring to belonging in this line of the family. And then, like I said, it ends up with the Fulham. But we can tell that it's all one family. We can see here that they're all one line of one family. And now I can touch briefly on that. Another find I want to share with you is that in the early records of Hampshire, and I can bring up just briefly here in Hampshire records that I'm combing through now. Again, primary records, deeds, and things of that nature associated with the family again. We find that at the same time, or just slightly before, in the late 13th century and early 14th century, there are a number of Paynes in these records of Hampshire that clearly show them to be members of the Paynell family of Normandy. And although they appear in the Hampshire records by the surname Payne, P-A-Y-N, it's clear that they're the Paynells of Normandy because of the names that are mentioned with them in the Hampshire records, which include the surname Lamprier that I think I referred to earlier. That the Paynes on the Isle of Jersey, off the coast of Normandy, have been intermarrying with since the 13th century, is found in the records of the island there. They're well documented. For example, you have James Payne that had published an armorial of Jersey back in the 18th century, I believe, that documents his family well. It's the same family that gave rise to Sir Ralph Payne, Baron Lavington, in the 17th century, who had been governor of the Leeward Islands, another immigrant to the near shores of America anyway. He made it as far as the Leeward Islands, where he was governor. And oddly, and now we know it's no coincidence, when the family returned to England after their selling their sugar farms down there in the islands of the Caribbean, they settled at Tempsford and, it's Tempsford, Bedfordshire. Blenheim and Tempford, Bedfordshire, which is right next door to Sir Robert Payne's family at St. Neots. That's no coincidence, folks. So I'm sure that they were in some degree aware of these long relationships that they had with each other. It seems to be evident. And I think I pretty well got it plotted out here in a visual way on a map. There's some mysteries. Let's continue talking about this Norman connection, because, like I say, I've established that the Paynes of Jersey were in Hampshire, in the same area of Southampton, near Southampton, in that same region, as the family of John Payne, Mayor of Southampton, and Lawrence Payne, his ancestor, who owned this dock in London. They also owned a quay in Southampton, as it turns out, but I can cover that in another video. But knowing that it was the same Paynes that came from Jersey, and although the Paynes in Normandy itself are always found locally in records referred to as the surname Paynell with a EL tacked to the end, the family in Jersey were of this. They came there from Normandy, from the Paynell family, but they chose not to add that EL to their name, and have forever, since the 13th century, are found in the records there. It's just simply Payne, P-A-Y-N-E, or excuse me, P-A-Y-N. The E was added after they got to England, and later, much later in time. So I think that we've pretty well established that the Paynes from Normandy came to England in at least two waves, if not multiple ways, but we know it was at least two. The first being with the Conqueror when at the Battle of Hastings, and afterwards they settled up here in Yorkshire, and their manors all the way down here into Devonshire. They also were very active with the Marcher Lords along the border of Wales, which would have taken them over into Ireland at some point, I'm sure. And there are references to the family over there, and that's the Painels. But we also have the Paynes, and I didn't mention it, but you got Paynes in Gloucestershire that I'm sure are of the same family. Their arms are completely different. I think it's a black shield with a gold fess with 3 lion's heads or leopard's heads or something. But I do believe we may be again talking about members of the same family, just different coat of arms in this case. As not unusual. I'll show you some other examples later on where this Payne family had different arms. In fact, I've already given you one. The Paynes of Huntingdonshire had a completely separate coat of arms from the Paynes of Fulham, the Paynes of East Anglia that we've mentioned, Sir Thomas Payne from Leicestershire. The arms are completely different. I'll do the heraldry another day. But I wanted to bring up the point that, after coming to England with the conquest, the Painels, were very prominent in the areas where they held their manors at the time of the conquest, through to about the 14th century or so. The family started dying off. Whereas suddenly you get, at that time, a great rise in the surname Payne. They dispense with the use of Fitzpayne. You don't find that anymore. We'll talk about them later. I'm certain that there's a relationship there to be found too. We'll get into all these details later. I'm keeping it as brief as I can now, probably up to an hour by now. But yeah, I lost my train of thought. I'll collect it soon here because I wanted to say that, initially you had the early Norman conquest of Ireland that was done pretty much, the Painels were involved in that. But afterwards, and as time went on and into the 13th century, another wave came, and this time it was Paynes that were settling in Ireland. And there's 2 bishops of Ireland, for example. But the family seems to have remained there for a time. Obviously, they came there from England. They weren't of Irish descent. And they stayed there for several generations, perhaps, and then came back to England again. And I think that's why we got Sir Thomas Payne appearing at Market Bosworth, when the family doesn't seem to have remained there very long. There are numerous records of their activity there, but they all seem to be isolated to particular periods of time before the family moved on. And I think that was through following the Earls of Wiltshire, Salisbury, Ormond, particularly Ulster. I forgot to mention the Earls of Ulster, and the Duke of Buckingham. So, and the Earls of Stafford. Follow those, and you can pretty much trace the movements of the Payne family. And the Mowbrays, too. I mean, they were tenants of the Mowbrays in Leicestershire and again in Norfolk. So, you have to include the Mowbray family, too. So, man, it's a lot of history. And I'm winging it, folks. This is all unscripted. I did have the help of those documents to help me with the records, just to, lay out the primary sources that I'm using here, to show you that this isn't an internet genealogy that I just dreamed up. This is using primary sources. And why I'm so fired up about it, because I've opened up a new side of history that nobody's known before. I don't think anybody has traced the provenance of the Ellesmere Chaucer in quite the way that I have, in the associations within the Payne family. Every document that I could find that spoke of the provenance of the Ellesmere Chaucer talks about it possibly being commissioned by a peer, but maybe it came into the Payne family through the Earls of Oxford, who they were friends with. But it's all speculation. But not once did they mention this relationship that goes back to John Payne, who was chief butler and friends of Geoffrey Chaucer. Now, that seems to be a pretty good provenance to me. I mean, he was evidently a very good friend with the man, purchased wine with him while the prince, not the prince, but I guess it was the Duke of Richmond, or the Earl of Richmond at the time, was in exile in England on crusade with John Payne. And I don't think Geoffrey Chaucer was not with them on crusade, but nevertheless, John Payne was still buying wine according to the royal itinerary of Henry IV and of the Earl when he was before he became king. Those records clearly show that Payne was buying wine from the Chaucers. And then you've got the relationship with the Duke of Lancaster and Geoffrey Chaucer himself marrying daughters of a man by the name of Payne, Payne de Rote, man who came from the Holy Roman Empire. As I mentioned before, the Paynes of Normandy, they weren't of Scandinavian descent. I'm convinced of it. Ain't no way in hell I'm going to believe I'm a Scandinavian Viking. However, I would believe that my family came from the Holy Roman Empire and were at some time called into Normandy by the Duke of Normandy for whatever reason, perhaps to be a goldsmith or money or something along those lines, as I'm speculating. I'll get into more detail later. And are given the surname Payne by these Normans after discovering that these people are coming from the Holy Roman Empire from places that bear the name of Pagi, that are administrative districts in the Holy Roman Empire, the plural of which goes by the name of Pagus. This stems from the Roman legions when divisions of the legions were called Pagi. And that stuck throughout the Holy Roman Empire and these administrative units of land that they occupied. After the collapse of the empire, those names stuck for the regions and bore the name Pagi. So if you were someone who lived in those Pagi and found yourself living down here in Normandy among the Normans and describing where you came from and who you were, you might understand why they might call you Pagi. And you would forever be called Pagi or pagan in records. And being a Christian family of the Holy Roman Empire and taking such offense to that, you might tack an EL, which is the name of God of Israel and Christianity, to the end of your name to Christianize it. And maybe some of them didn't feel that was necessary, and like the Paynes in Jersey, and just went by P-A-Y-N. So that's what I'm talking about here. Now, those Paynes who went over into Jersey remained English citizens during the time of King John. After they lost, England lost the Duchy of Normandy. These Paynells and Paynes had to choose between their lands in Normandy and in England. And I think the Paynes rode the fence. I think they kind of got away with it on both sides because they still had family in Normandy they could turn their Norman lands over to and retain possession of their English lands and still go home to Normandy if they wanted. But the Paynes in Jersey, I think during this whole mess, you had this group over here in Jersey that came as a second wave over here in New Hampshire. And that's exactly the story that the family of Sir Ralph Payne, Lord Lavington, maintained, that appear in the records of Armorial of Jersey. But they believed that their ancestor came to Devonshire during the English Civil Wars, so much later. And that was what ancestry Sir Ralph Payne claimed when he asked for the title of Brampton, which I think is in either Huntingdonshire or Norfolk, which would associate it with either one of those families. But that's what I understand was the title that he had requested, but received the title of Lavington, the Irish title of Lavington, and again, an Irish title. And I think there might be a reason for that. Again, Bloomfield, in his work in East Anglia and Norfolk and Suffolk, his histories of Norfolk and Suffolk, claim that the family that I'm speaking of in East Anglia come from Irish descent, from an Adam Payne of Ireland. So all of this meshes up right down to the title and coat of arms, well, not perhaps the coat of arms, but certainly the title given to members of this family that associate them with Ireland and that associate them with each other, with these different branches. The records all seem to support this. So I guess what I'm saying is that it seems like the heralds and the Crown of England determined that Ralph Payne, a member of the Jersey Payne family, was somehow related to these Paynes in East Anglia that also have a claim to Irish descent from family living on the island for perhaps several generations. So there we go. I think that's going to do it for me, folks. I'm burned out, and I bet you are too. We hit 1 hour and 5 minutes, 3 seconds. But thank you very much. Please like my channel, subscribe, give me some suggestions on more videos to do. Pick any moment in medieval history, and I'll bet you I can find something to talk about. Give it a shot. Help me out here. I'm trying to get a story out. I need help. I need professionals who are trained in this, who know about these things, who can give me some advice and feedback and encouragement and everything else that I've lacked, that only my OCD has fueled all these years. And it's time that I get the story out, start trying to tell their story. I think it's a very interesting side of history that we can gain knowledge from if we just give it a chance. And so I'd appreciate your help with that. Again, my name is Patrick Payne. We'll see you next time in the next video. Bye-bye.